Hello, this is a lecture on Chapter 4 of the MIS 4th edition textbook by Bidgilly. This chapter covers personal, legal, ethical, and organizational issues of information technology. The learning outcomes of this chapter include discuss information privacy and methods for improving privacy of information, explain the effects on information privacy of email data collection and censorship, discuss the ethical issues related to information technology, discuss the principles of intellectual property and issues related to the infringement of intellectual property, discuss the information system issues that affect organizations, including things such as the digital divide, electronic publishing, and on the connection between workplace and employees' health. And last, describe green computing and the ways it can improve the quality of the environment. We're going to start with privacy issues. Information technologies have brought many benefits, but they have also created concerns about privacy in the workplace. Some of the things to keep in mind is how social networking sites are being used as it relates to your privacy. Many employers are now searching through social networking sites when they recruit. They also use that technique in some places to monitor employee behavior. Those are things you want to be aware of when you're deciding what to put out on your social networking sites, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, etc. Whatever you're using, even Snapchat, a picture is often worth 1,000 words, remember. You want to know how this might impact you and be aware of that before you start posting things. Some universities use it to monitor student behavior, as well as when you're in college, what you put out there when you go to apply for a job can have an impact. All of the things you put out on the internet and the web, cyberspace, never really go away. Keep in mind, the question of whether this is legal to use those or ethical is still somewhat up in the air. You have to remember, information you post on these sites is considered public domain. So once you put it out there, it could come back to haunt you later on. Those are things you need to consider on a personal level. If employees are using it to monitor employee performance, another thing to keep in mind, how do they monitor employee performance on the internet use in your office? Other things to look at and consider are the misuse and abuse of that information out there. So many businesses are collecting, whether it's a healthcare organization, financial institutions, etc. We're collecting and dealing with personal data. It goes into their databases. There's so much room for the misuse and abuse of that information. It can have pretty serious consequences. People who have just out of curiosity, snooped around in their company's accounts because they're curious, have lost their jobs over that if they had no legitimate reason to have access to that information. Those are things for you to consider. There are some important concepts regarding the web and internet privacy. Some things you need to understand. One being the acceptable use policies. Companies need acceptable use policies in place. There are possible legal ramifications and consequences of using the web and networks, so an organization should first establish an acceptable use policy. That way, if they have somebody who they feel is abusing the use of those things, they have a policy to refer back to be able to say why that's not legal or ethical. And what are the consequences of not complying? Accountability is another issue that comes up. How do you hold somebody accountable? What do you expect them to be responsible for? It involves both the users and the organization's responsibilities and liabilities. So it's not all about what is the employee responsible and accountable for, but also what is the company accountable for. And we also have non-repudiation. This is basically a method for binding all the parties to a contract. Email and data collection. Some of the issues that come up with email. Email is very widely used, and there's lots of privacy issues out there. One issue is simply just junk email, also called spam. This is unsolicited email sent for advertising purposes. If you're sending things via email that you consider very private and personal, you may want to consider what types of things can I put into place. Maybe I need to use encryption on my email. Those are things you can learn about more in order to help protect your information. We also, in the data collection area, have things that are happening on the web, on websites. A lot of websites put out cookies. These are small text files with unique ID tags that are embedded into a web browser and then saved on your hard drive, you as the user. They keep track of things about you for that website, so the next time you go back to that website, you may not have to re-enter certain information. It will remember things about you. Good news, bad news. Do you want it to remember things about you? Keep that in mind when it's trying to record information about you or when you are entering information. Watch for clues that it wants to record this, or perhaps just clear your cookies frequently. There are also log files, which are generated by web server software. These are used to record a user's actions on a website. So they're out there sometimes just keeping track of what are the things you look at on their website. These are used for putting out little targeted pop-up ads to you in various ways. For example, if you search for a new coat on a particular store's website, the next time you go to that website, it may have used not only cookies if you signed in to an account, but they may have also recorded all of the coats you looked at. And then they may start pushing suggestions for you via the information they've recorded in their log files. Now, this chapter also talks about ethical issues of information technology. Basically, there's the thought about ethical issues versus legal issues. Here we have our little grid. Things can be either legal or illegal, and ethical or unethical. Some things are both ethical and legal. Some things may be ethical but not necessarily legal, and so on. You want to make sure you understand each of these quadrants of the grid, whether it's in 1, 2, 3, or 4, to give you some examples for you to evaluate situations so you can try to determine which they are. Things like you make 2 copies of a software package you just bought and sell one to a friend. Is that legal? Is it ethical? Where does it fit? Okay. To copy a software package that you bought and sell it to someone else is clearly illegal and unethical. That puts it in quadrant 4. Because you're buying a license to use software quite often anymore, and you do not have the right to resell it unless you've purchased a resale license, which most of us don't. Situation 2 was you make 2 copies of a software package you just bought for personal use in case the original software fails and you need a backup. Used to be, software was sold mostly on discs, and you would make a copy of your disc so that in case your original was damaged, scratched, something like that, you would still have a usable copy. Now we download a lot of software, and so we simply make a copy of the file that we download as a backup in case the original is deleted. So how does that fall into things? Well, it's ethical for you to do that, although some software vendors may try to prohibit you and consider it illegal. So that puts it into quadrant 2. seems a reasonable thing that most users feel they should be able to do, but not all software vendors agree. You have to check your agreements with vendors in order to determine this. Situation 3, a banker uses the information a client enters in a loan application to sell other financial products to this client. Now, as a customer, I may feel that's not all that appropriate. It is, however, legal, but it may not be ethical. It depends on your agreement with them. So that would put it in quadrant 3. Number 4 is a credit card company selling its customers' mailing address to its competitors. That also falls into quadrant 3. It's legal, but it doesn't seem very ethical. Situation 5, a supervisor fires a programmer who has intentionally spread viruses to the organization's network. Is that legal and ethical? Actually, yes. The supervisor's behavior is both legal and ethical because there is an expectancy by a company that its employees will not do things such as spread viruses through their computer network because it prevents the company from being able to stay in business. Other things to consider in the ethics area. Your textbook gives you 10 commandments of computer ethics. This is a good thing to review. If you're following these and using these as your guidelines, then you can usually feel that you are in the right place with this information and with your ethics. We also have things to consider as a knowledge worker. Again, I would urge you to read those and determine if you feel you know how to handle things. Intellectual property. Again, we have intellectual property, just a legal umbrella covering protections that involve copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, and patents for creations of the mind developed by people or businesses. You can usually divide those into 2 categories. Industrial property, things like inventions, trademarks, logos, etc., and copyrighted material. This covers literary and artistic works. Another thing they point out in this section, an aspect of intellectual property that's caused some issue as of late, cyber squatting. This is where one company has a registered domain name and they are out there doing business. It's their trademark. And somebody else comes in and they're trying to use that domain name or one very, very, very similar, one digit off, to try and take over some of their business perhaps, or divert traffic from the legitimate website. Lots of reasons why that happens. Other issues to consider in this chapter, the digital divide. This is what some people view as the difference between those people who are information rich and information poor. It could be because of the availability of information technology and internet connection, could be because people cannot afford computers, or maybe because the area in which they live simply does not have a high-speed internet connection, making them unable to take advantage of many of the digital services out there which require high-speed internet connection. And last, the impact of information technology in the workplace is through things like virtual organizations. These are networks of independent companies, suppliers, customers, and manufacturers that connect via shared information technology so they can share skills and costs and have access to each other's markets. Creates a different type of business. Instead of being one big physical business, they are actually a virtual organization. In summary, these are the issues addressed in this chapter. Please ensure you understand them before you get ready for the quiz and the exam.